Before we can understand why this controversy exploded the way it did, we need to understand who Florence Pugh is, not just as a celebrity, but as a cultural force. Florence Rose Pugh was born on January 3, 1996 in Oxford, England. She grew up in a household that she has repeatedly described as warm, supportive, and filled with strong women. Her parents are Deborah, a dancer and actress, and Clinton Pugh, a restaurateur. She has 3 siblings. By all accounts, she was raised to be confident, direct, and unafraid of opinion. She made her film debut at just 19 years old in the British drama Lady Macbeth in 2016, a film where she played a young woman who murders her way to freedom in Victorian England. It was not a shy start. That performance earned her the BAFTA Rising Star Award nomination and announced to the world that a new kind of actress had arrived, one who was unafraid of darkness, complexity, and being profoundly uncomfortable on screen. From there, her trajectory was unlike most. She didn't take the starlet path. She didn't do rom-coms to warm up. She went from Lady Macbeth to Midsummer, Ari Aster's folk horror masterpiece, where she delivered one of the most emotionally raw performances in modern horror history. Critics didn't just praise her. They used words like devastating, elemental, once in a generation. Then came Little Women, where she played Amy March and was so magnetic she nearly stole the entire film from the title character. That earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She was 24 years old. Then Black Widow. Then Don't Worry, Darling. Then Oppenheimer, one of the highest-grossing films in history, where she held her own against Cillian Murphy and the entire weight of Christopher Nolan's filmmaking machine. Then We Live in Time, her 2024 drama opposite Andrew Garfield. The point is this: Florence Pugh is not a celebrity who became famous for being controversial. She became famous for being extraordinary. And that distinction matters enormously when we analyze why the fashion controversy cut so deeply and why so many people rushed to her defense. Because when they came for her dress, they weren't just coming for a celebrity trying to get attention. They were coming for a serious artist who also happened to refuse to apologize for her body. And that combination, talent plus unapologetic self-possession, is what makes Florence Pugh such a potent cultural flashpoint. The style evolution. How Florence Pugh became a fashion statement. Let's talk about her fashion journey, because it's inseparable from the controversy. In her early years, Pugh dressed like many young actresses building their careers, polished, beautiful, conventional. She wore flowing gowns, structured blazers, tasteful awards show choices, nothing that would get fashion critics whispering. But somewhere around 2021 and 2022, something shifted. Pugh began taking creative risks with her fashion choices that mirrored the risks she was taking in her film roles. She buzzed her head. She wore architectural gowns that challenged conventional femininity. She showed up to events in looks that made fashion editors lean forward and think. And then came the Valentino couture show in Rome, July 8, 2022. And nothing was ever quite the same. On July 8, 2022, Florence Pugh attended the Valentino Haute Couture Fall, Winter 2022-2023 show held at the iconic Piazza di Spagna, the Spanish Steps, in Rome. This was one of the most anticipated fashion events of the year. Creative director Pierpaolo Piccioli had produced a show called The Beginning, an exuberant, gloriously theatrical celebration of the Valentino archive and its future. Pugh had been chosen as a brand ambassador for Valentino at this point, a significant commercial and artistic relationship. She was dressed in a gown specifically created for the occasion, a vivid electric pink floor-length tulle creation with a halter neckline and billowing skirts. It was beautiful, it was commanding, and, in a decision that Pugh later revealed was deliberate and knowing, the lining was removed from the bodice, leaving the fabric entirely sheer. Pugh walked in wearing that dress, chest visible through the pink tulle, nipples absolutely present and accounted for, and the internet caught fire. Now here is something critically important that often gets lost in the narrative. At the same Valentino show, multiple professional models walked in similarly sheer garments with similarly visible bodies. Not a single one of them trended. Not a single one of them was subjected to a torrent of commentary about their chest size. The models were wearing what they were expected to wear. Florence Pugh was a celebrity, an actress, someone who, in the minds of many social media users, was supposed to know her place. The photograph went viral almost immediately. Within hours, it had been shared millions of times. And within those same hours, the comment sections on Pugh's Instagram, on Twitter, X, on Reddit, on gossip forums, divided sharply into two camps that would harden into something approaching war. Camp 1, the critics. The negative response to Florence Pugh's Valentino dress was breathtaking in its range, from the mildly disapproving to the vile. At the milder end, fashion commentators questioned whether the look was appropriate for a celebrity of Pugh's standing. Some argued that there was a difference between a model wearing a sheer garment on a runway and an actress choosing to do so at a public event. They suggested it was calculated attention-seeking. They called it a stunt. Then there were the body shamers. And this is where the story takes an ugly turn that cannot be minimized or intellectualized away. Pugh was subjected to an enormous volume of comments from men. She later made a point of specifying that the overwhelming majority of the nastiest criticism came from men, who expressed their disappointment with the size of her breasts. Not their shock that she was wearing a sheer dress. Not even their disapproval of the fashion choice. Their disappointment. As though Florence Pugh had somehow promised them something and failed to deliver. Men with their full names, job titles, and professional email addresses in their social media bios publicly wrote things like, "She should be embarrassed being so flat-chested." Disappointing. Expected more? Her chest could be slightly bigger. Comments that reduced a multi-BAFTA-nominated, Oscar-nominated actress to a body part, and then found that body part insufficient. There was also a third category of criticism, the moral concern contingent. These were individuals, often operating under the guise of propriety or traditional values, who argued that Pugh's appearance was inappropriate, indecent, or contributing to the sexualization of public spaces. Some invoked religion. Some invoked what they believed were appropriate standards for public behavior. Some, and this is the part that Pugh found most disturbing, went further, suggesting that women who dress in revealing ways bear some responsibility for sexual violence against them. Let that sit for a moment, because Pugh did. And then she responded. The Instagram post that changed everything. 2 days after the Valentino show on July 10th, 2022, Florence Pugh posted on Instagram. What she wrote became one of the most discussed, debated, and quoted celebrity social media posts in recent memory. She did not apologize. She did not explain herself. She did not hedge. She began by acknowledging that she had expected commentary, positive and negative, and that she had been entirely at peace with that before, during, and after wearing the dress. She talked about watching the ease with which men felt entitled to publicly destroy a woman's body. She named the specific comments, the tiny tits remarks, the flat-chested insults, directly, without euphemism. She was unflinching. She then addressed the philosophical question beneath the attacks. Why are people scared of breasts? Small ones? Large ones? Any of them? What, she asked, was so terrifying? She wrote about growing up in a household of strong, curvy women. She wrote about learning to find power in her body rather than shame. She wrote about the mission she had set for herself in the entertainment industry, to refuse to let her body become someone else's property, someone else's standard, someone else's disappointment. And she ended with instructions, grow up, respect people, respect bodies, respect women, respect humans. The post went nuclear, not just among fans, among fellow celebrities, among cultural commentators, among journalists. Actress Joey King wrote that Pugh had put into words what so many women feel but cannot articulate. Aubrey Plaza offered enthusiastic agreement. Major publications covered it as news because it was. Criticism 2. The privilege problem. Several cultural critics, particularly those writing from feminist and intersectional perspectives, have raised an uncomfortable point about Florence Pugh's fashion moment and its reception. Pugh is white. She is conventionally attractive by dominant cultural standards. She is thin. She is wealthy. She is, in the language of cultural theory, a woman whose body reads as acceptable even when she is being told it is not. The body positivity and free-the-nipple movements that Pugh is consciously or unconsciously participating in have a complex relationship with privilege. Women whose bodies are further outside dominant beauty standards, heavier women, women of color, disabled women, older women, trans women, have been fighting this same battle for decades. Many of them have not been celebrated for it. Many of them have been punished for it. When Florence Pugh wears a sheer dress and the internet argues about her nipples, that is a specific form of visibility. When a fat woman wears a sheer dress, the response is often categorically different. Not a cultural debate, but straightforward cruelty. When a trans woman does the same, the violence of the response can be literal. This is not Florence Pugh's fault. But it is a fair critique of the way her fashion moments have been centered in conversations about body liberation that have broader and more complex dimensions than any one celebrity's red carpet choices. Question: some critics, particularly those approaching from conservative or traditional value frameworks, have raised what they see as a legitimate concern about the influence of celebrity behavior on younger audiences. Pugh has an enormous following among teenagers and young adults. They argue that normalizing extremely revealing fashion choices for that demographic carries real social consequences. This is a more complex argument than it might appear. It is not simply cover up or you'll corrupt the youth. That framing is reductive and historically used to police women's bodies. But there is a genuine conversation to be had about the relationship between celebrity influence, body image, and fashion choices in an era where social media creates impossible comparisons for young people already struggling with self-image. The counter-argument, and it is a powerful one, is that Pugh's message is not "dress like me." Her message is "dress like yourself and do not apologize for your body." That is arguably exactly the message that young people struggling with body image need to hear. But the critics who worry about the social impacts of celebrity influence are not operating in pure bad faith, and dismissing them entirely does not strengthen the pro-Pugh case. Now, let's talk about the other side. Because if the critique deserves honest engagement, so does the defense. Defense 3, the ongoing pattern, shows this wasn't isolated. When Florence Pugh appeared at the We Live in Time premiere in New York City in September 2024, wearing a lacy, sheer Christian Dior gown belted at the waist over a black bralette and high-waist underwear, the cycle repeated. The same kinds of comments, the same men expressing the same disappointment with her body, the same rush of fans to defend her. But something was different this time. Pugh was 28, not 26. She had 2 more years of living with this particular kind of public scrutiny. And in her interview with the Sunday Times, published December 2024, she said something that crystallized the pattern with remarkable clarity. She said she remembered watching the industry as a young woman and feeling unrepresented. She remembered headlines about Keira Knightley's weight. She watched women being torn apart despite being talented and beautiful. She decided she did not want to abide by those rules. This is not the statement of a woman who stumbled into controversy by accident. This is the statement of a woman who understood from the beginning what the entertainment industry does to women and made a deliberate decision to resist it. That deserves recognition, and that is exactly what her fans are giving her. Defense 4. Her words had real impact. Let's not be abstract about this. When Florence Pugh posted her Instagram response in 2022, it was read by millions of people. We know from subsequent reporting and from Elle UK's decision to name her British icon at their Style Awards, in part because of that response, that it registered broadly in the culture. We also know, from the research into fan communities and from Pugh's own reporting and interviews, that young women reached out to her in enormous numbers to say that her words had helped them, that they had given them language, that they had felt seen by someone in a position of visibility saying the quiet part out loud. Fashion as protest has a long history. From suffragettes wearing white to civil rights-era dress codes to the punk movement's deliberate confrontation with mainstream aesthetics, what you wear has always been able to mean something beyond fabric and thread. Florence Pugh's sheer gowns mean something. To deny that is to deliberately misread the cultural moment, because the industry's response is more nuanced and more interesting than you might expect. Valentino and the designer perspective. Pierpaolo Piccioli, the creative director of Valentino, who dressed Florence Pugh in the infamous pink gown, has been thoughtful about the controversy. He has spoken about the intentionality of the garment and his collaborative relationship with Pugh. From a pure fashion perspective, what Pugh wore was couture, the highest form of fashion craftsmanship. It was made to be seen. It was made to provoke a response. That is what couture does. The idea that a celebrity wearing Valentino couture is somehow too much for a Valentino couture show is paradoxical. It suggests that the critics were not objecting to the fashion, but to the person wearing it, to what her body looked like in it, to the audacity of her comfort with herself. The naked dress trend. Context that changes everything. Here's something that fashion journalists understand but general audiences often don't. The sheer or naked dress has been a recurring fixture in high fashion for decades. Cher wore it in the 1970s. Kate Moss's accidentally sheer dress at the 1993 Elite Model Awards became one of fashion history's most reproduced images. Jennifer Lopez's Versace Grammy dress in 2000 is literally credited with creating Google image search. Beyoncé has built a complex relationship with sheer throughout her career. By 2022, the naked dress trend was well established in celebrity fashion. The difference between those previous moments and Florence Pugh's Valentino appearance is partly contextual, the particular inflection point of the Roe v. Wade overturn happening just weeks earlier made the politics of women's bodies sharper and more electric than usual, but also partly about Pugh herself. Her response transformed what might have been a fashion moment into a manifesto. By 2026, fashion analysts writing about what they are calling Naked Dress 2.0 are crediting Pugh as one of the primary forces who shifted the cultural understanding of transparent fashion from stunt to strategy. One analysis noted that Pugh did not treat criticism as a reason to retreat. She used it to challenge the idea that a woman in a transparent dress must be inviting judgment. That is the fashion industry's verdict. Not a thumbs down, a foundational rewrite. The industry's self-examination. Pugh's ongoing battle with body commentary has also contributed to a broader industry reckoning. Her 2024 Sunday Times interview, in which she called it exhausting to navigate the fine lines women must walk in Hollywood between being too much and not enough, too bold and too safe, too sexual and too prudish, was widely shared among industry professionals. When she said she remembered watching the industry tear apart Keira Knightley for gaining weight, she wasn't speaking as a fan. She was speaking as someone who entered that industry as a teenager and made a conscious decision about what kind of person she was going to be in it. That decision cost her something: the easiness of silence, the safety of compliance. Her willingness to make that trade is part of what makes her fans' defense of her so fierce. I want to spend some time on something that the usual coverage of this story skips over because I think it's the most important part. Why does a dress do this? Why does a visible nipple on a beautiful, accomplished woman at a fashion show generate the kind of response that we're talking about? The kind that requires a multiple paragraph Instagram post to address? The kind that gets people who list their employer in their bio to write the words flat-chested at a stranger on the internet? Let's go to the psychology. The entitlement architecture social psychologists have written extensively about the phenomenon of male entitlement to female bodies in public spaces. The core mechanism is this: when a woman makes herself visually present in a way that exceeds the boundaries set by dominant cultural norms, some men experience this not as her exercise of autonomy, but as a kind of provocation, a breach of an implicit contract. The implicit contract goes like this: women's bodies are, in the dominant heterosexual male gaze, available for visual consumption. But that consumption is supposed to happen on terms that men recognize and control. The woman is supposed to be presenting herself for evaluation, not simply existing in her body because she feels like it. Florence Pugh, in a sheer dress at a fashion show, was not, by her own account, thinking about how men would respond to her appearance. She was excited. She was comfortable. She was an actress who had been asked to attend a couture show by a brand she loved, and she wore what they designed for her with joy. Full stop. That joy, that complete absence of self-consciousness or appeal to the male gaze, is, counterintuitively, what made some men furious. She hadn't presented herself for evaluation. She had simply existed. And when they evaluated her anyway, they found her insufficient. And that felt to them like an affront. Because if she had been seeking their approval, she would have behaved differently. This is what Pugh identified in her Instagram post when she noted that men seemed tangibly threatened by her choice. She was right. They were not angry because she had shown too much. They were angry because she had shown it for herself. The freedom that frightens. In her LUK interview in 2023, Pugh offered the most crystalline articulation of this dynamic that I've encountered. It's the freedom that people are scared of, the fact I'm comfortable and happy. This is not a throwaway line. This is a psychological insight. The comfort, the demonstrable, inarguable comfort that Pugh displayed in her body at that fashion show was the actual provocation. Not the nipples, the comfort. Because a woman who is comfortable in her body on her own terms is a woman who does not need external validation, and a woman who does not need external validation from men is a woman who has, in some fundamental way, exited the system of approval that functions as a form of social control. That exit, when it's visible, when it's photographed and posted and responds to criticism with, "Why are you so scared of breasts?" is threatening to a worldview that depends on women seeking male approval. It's not threatening in the sense of physical danger. It's threatening in the sense of ideological destabilization. If she doesn't need your approval, what exactly is your power over her? Instagram's complicated relationship with female nipples. Florence Pugh ended her 2022 Instagram post with a hashtag calling for the freeing of nipples. This was not a casual choice. Instagram's content moderation policies have, since the platform's founding, operated with what critics describe as a double standard regarding male and female presenting nipples. Male nipples are generally permitted. Female nipples are generally not. This policy has been contested for years by photographers, artists, activists, and ordinary users who point out that the policy is both gender discriminatory and anatomically incoherent. A nipple is a nipple. Instagram has occasionally modified its stance, noting that nipples are permitted in some protest contexts, but the fundamental asymmetry remains. The fact that Pugh's post, including images of herself in the sheer dress, remained on Instagram, while similar images of non-celebrity women are routinely removed, is, as multiple critics have pointed out, itself a demonstration of the privilege dimension we discussed earlier. Pugh's cultural capital protected her images in ways that ordinary women's cultural capital cannot. Because if we keep this story contained to Florence Pugh and a pink dress, we miss the bigger picture. Roe v. Wade and the body politics backdrop. When Florence Pugh wore that Valentino gown on July 8, 2022, the United States had overturned Roe v. Wade less than 2 weeks earlier. On June 24, 2022, the Supreme Court issued its ruling in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, eliminating the constitutional right to abortion that had been in place for nearly 50 years. The timing was not lost on commentators at the time. As multiple cultural critics pointed out, within 2 weeks of the United States government asserting the right to control what happened inside women's bodies, here was a woman defiantly displaying her body on the world stage and refusing to apologize for it. Pugh has been careful not to explicitly frame her fashion choices as political protest, but the cultural context was inescapable, and it shaped the way the story was received, for supporters and critics alike. Supporters saw it as a gesture of defiance in a moment when female bodily autonomy was under direct legislative attack. Critics who framed their objection in terms of appropriate female behavior were, knowingly or not, participating in a broader cultural argument about who gets to make decisions about women's bodies. The history of policing female appearance. Let's be historically honest. The policing of what women wear is not new. It is ancient. Every era has its version of the acceptable woman costume and its version of punishment for deviation. In the early 20th century, women were arrested for wearing swimsuits deemed too revealing. In the mid-20th century, women were sent home from jobs for wearing pants. In the late 20th century, girls were sent home from school for violating dress codes that invariably targeted female clothing choices. In the 21st century, women are subjected to online harassment campaigns for their fashion choices. The mechanism changes. The underlying dynamic, male institutions asserting authority over female appearance, does not. Florence Pugh's controversy exists within that history. Her response to it, direct, unafraid, philosophically grounded, is part of a long tradition of women who have refused to accept external authority over their appearance as legitimate. From the suffragettes who chose their white dresses deliberately, to the women who burned bras in the 1960s, an event somewhat mythologized but culturally significant, to the Free the Nipple activists of the 2010s, Pugh is participating in something much larger than a moment on a red carpet. The celebrity body as political object. There is a specific dynamic that applies to celebrity women's bodies that does not apply to ordinary women's bodies, and it cuts in both directions. On one hand, celebrity bodies are subject to a level of public scrutiny that is exceptional. Every inch is photographed. Every perceived change is documented. The language used to describe celebrity bodies would constitute harassment if directed at private individuals. On the other hand, celebrity bodies command a kind of cultural attention that private bodies cannot. When Florence Pugh responds to body shaming with the kind of clarity and force she has demonstrated, she is able to reach millions of people simultaneously in a way that an ordinary woman making the same argument cannot. This creates an interesting dynamic. The celebrity is more harmed by public body scrutiny than a private individual would be, because it's so much more intense and widespread, but also more equipped to push back against it, because she has a platform and a following. Florence Pugh has, perhaps more deliberately than any of her peers, used that platform specifically for that pushback. And the fans who defend her understand this. They are not simply protecting a celebrity they like. They are recognizing someone using the leverage of celebrity to fight a battle on their behalf. That recognition creates fierce loyalty. Incident 1. The 2022 Valentino Show, The Origin Point, July 8, 2022. Rome. The Valentino Haute Couture Fall-Winter 2022-2023 show. Florence Pugh in a sheer hot pink Valentino tulle gown. The decision to remove the lining was deliberate and collaborative. The reaction was immediate and bifurcated. Within 48 hours, Pugh had posted her landmark Instagram response. Within a week, the story had been covered by virtually every major media outlet in the world. Long-term significance. This is the foundational moment. Everything else in the Pugh fashion narrative flows from this point. The language she found here, the questions she asked, the way she framed the male entitlement to criticize women's bodies has been applied and amplified repeatedly since. Incident 2. Venice 2022. She didn't retreat. Just weeks after the Valentino controversy, Florence Pugh appeared at the Venice Film Festival for the premiere of Don't Worry, Darling. She wore Valentino again, a different look, equally bold. Many observers noted that this was the first test of whether the controversy had rattled her. It had not. The fan response to her Venice appearance was celebratory. Critics looked for a retreat and found none. This cemented something important in the narrative. Pugh was not going to apologize through her clothing choices. She was going to keep showing up in the clothes she chose on her terms. Incident 3. Met Gala 2023. The buzz cut moment. The 2023. Met Gala brought a different kind of Pugh controversy. She arrived with a fully shaved head beneath a towering feather headpiece, wearing custom Valentino. The dress was not sheer this time, but the gesture, the deliberate, visible rejection of conventional female beauty signifiers, provoked its own wave of commentary. Some critics found the buzz cut shocking or unflattering. Many more found it extraordinary. The act of a woman who had so thoroughly internalized the message that her body and appearance were hers alone that she was willing to remove the single feature most associated with conventional female attractiveness and simply not care. The fans went into ecstasy. The Florence Pugh shaved head discourse was, in its own way, a second chapter of the Valentino dress story. Same dynamics, different fashion choice, same outcome. Incident 4. Oppenheimer Press Circuit 2023. Professional Respectability Politics. During the press circuit for Oppenheimer, Pugh was part of one of the most talked about promotional campaigns in recent memory, but in a different way than the fashion controversies. The film's themes, guilt, consequence, the weight of world historical decisions, gave her a different context for her public presence. Notably, critics who had focused on her fashion choices largely fell silent during this period. This observation is itself instructive. When Florence Pugh was operating in a context that affirmed her intellectual and professional seriousness, a Christopher Nolan film, critical acclaim, award season, the appetite for policing her appearance diminished. When she returned to fashion contexts, it returned. The double standard between serious actress and woman at a fashion event was on display. Incident 5. We Live in Time, 2024. The pattern continues, September 2024. Florence Pugh at the New York premiere of We Live in Time, wearing a lacy, sheer Christian Dior gown. A black bralette visible underneath. Comment sections immediately hostile from the same quarters. Fans immediately defensive. But what made this incident notable was Pugh's subsequent interview with the Sunday Times in December 2024, where she articulated the exhaustion of navigating this dynamic. She was no longer just responding to individual incidents, she was naming the systemic pattern. She was making the argument that this particular form of body commentary was not random, but structural, not individual, but institutional, not about her specifically, but about what the entertainment industry does to women as a class. This was a more sophisticated version of the 2022 response, and her fans received it accordingly, not just as defense of a single fashion choice, but as analysis of a system they recognized and lived in. To young women, the most powerful dimension of the Florence Pugh fan defense is what it means to young women, particularly those in their teens and early 20s. We are living through an alarming moment in terms of young women's mental health and body image. Social media has created an environment of constant comparison that previous generations never navigated. Eating disorders are at crisis levels. Body dysmorphia is widespread. The pressure to look a certain way, communicated through the algorithms that shape every girl's social media feed, is relentless. Into that environment, Florence Pugh has consistently sent a different message. I have lived in this body for a long time. I know it. I am proud of it. Your approval of it is not required. That message, specific, direct, grounded in lived experience, is exactly what a generation of young women drowning in acceptable body content needs. And the fan defense of Pugh is, in significant part, an expression of gratitude for that message. She has said the thing they wanted to say and couldn't. To the fashion industry. For fashion professionals, Florence Pugh represents something different, a client and collaborator who has transformed commercial fashion moments into cultural ones. She has demonstrated that fashion can mean something beyond aesthetics. That address can be a manifesto. The fashion industry, to its credit, has largely responded by leaning further into this dynamic rather than retreating from it. Designers continue to dress her in challenging, transparent, boundary-pushing looks. The awards seasoned stylists who work with her understand that they are not just dressing a body, they are participating in an ongoing cultural argument. That is an unusual and significant relationship between celebrity and industry. And the fan defense of Pugh has helped enable it by demonstrating that there is an enormous audience that values this kind of fashion as statement rather than fashion as mere spectacle. To other celebrities within Hollywood, Florence Pugh's handling of the body-shaming controversy has become something of a reference point. When Joey King and Aubrey Plaza publicly responded to her Instagram post, they were signaling alignment. When other celebrities face similar criticism and respond with defiance rather than apology, they are often explicitly or implicitly citing Pugh's template. The template is name the dynamic, don't apologize, ask the clarifying question that puts the critics on the defensive, be specific, be forceful, do not perform distress. That template is being used. And the cultural climate around celebrity fashion controversies has shifted, partly as a result. The expectation that women celebrities who receive body-shaming criticism should go quiet or apologize is less dominant than it was a decade ago. Pugh has contributed to that shift. Let's look at some of the specific types of criticism that have been leveled at Florence Pugh's fashion choices, because not all critics are operating from the same place. The appropriateness critics. These critics tend to frame their objections in terms of context appropriateness. They might agree that sheer fashion is fine on a runway, but argue that a celebrity attending a public event has different responsibilities. This is a more intellectually honest position than pure body shaming, but it still struggles with the double standard problem. Men's choices about what to wear to public events are not subjected to similar analysis. The traditional values critics. A subset of critics objecting on religious or traditional moral grounds is worth engaging with seriously, because these voices represent a significant portion of the population, and they are often engaged with in bad faith by both supporters and other critics. The honest version of this critique is, I believe modesty is a virtue that has value, and I think public figures have some responsibility towards social norms that most people share. This is a coherent position. It does not require believing that Florence Pugh deserved to be body-shamed. It does not require reducing her to her chest size. The problem is that this version of the critique is rarely what appears in Pugh's comment sections. What appears there is not a principled argument about modesty norms. It is targeted hostility about a specific body part's insufficiency. That gap between the coherent traditional values position and the actual comments being made is significant. The "she's asking for attention" critics Perhaps the most common and least defensible critical position is the suggestion that Florence Pugh wears revealing clothing specifically to generate controversy, and that her response to criticism is itself a marketing strategy. Even if we grant both premises, and as we noted earlier, there is a version of both that is at least partially true, this critique proves too much. It suggests that women who are aware of the likely reaction to their choices and proceed anyway have forfeited their right to respond to that reaction. This is circular. You knew you'd be criticized, so you can't complain about the criticism. But no other class of public behavior is subjected to this logic. Artists who know their work will be controversial don't forfeit the right to respond to reviews. Politicians who take controversial positions don't forfeit the right to defend those positions. The "she's asking for it" logic has always been reserved primarily for women, and primarily for situations involving women's bodies. Its persistence in the Florence Pugh discourse is itself revealing. Where does all of this leave us? Florence Pugh is 28 years old. She is at or approaching the peak of her creative powers. She has multiple major films ahead of her. She has a relationship with the fashion industry that continues to produce interesting cultural moments. And she has a fan base that has demonstrated repeatedly that they will show up, loudly and articulately, every time someone comes for her. What the story changed? They have not ended body shaming. They have not changed Instagram's content moderation policies. They have not eliminated the double standard between how men and women are treated in terms of appearance. They have not made the entertainment industry a safer or more equitable place for women. What they have done, they have shifted the expected response to celebrity body shaming from silence and apology to articulate, forceful resistance. They have given millions of women and girls language for an experience that many of them had but couldn't name. They have demonstrated, concretely and visibly, that a woman can be subjected to the full force of social media misogyny and survive it. Not just survive it, but be shaped by it into something stronger and clearer. They have influenced the fashion industry's understanding of what celebrity fashion can mean. They have contributed to a broader cultural conversation about modesty, bodily autonomy, and the gendered politics of appearance that is ongoing and necessary. That is not nothing. In fact, that is quite a lot. The unresolved tension. There is an unresolved tension at the heart of this story that I want to name directly because I think it's important. Florence Pugh is simultaneously a genuine advocate for women's bodily autonomy and a commercial celebrity whose body is a literal asset in a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. These two things coexist. Neither negates the other. But the tension between them does complicate the pure liberation narrative. She is fighting for the right not to be evaluated on the basis of her appearance, while also existing in an industry that evaluates women almost entirely on the basis of their appearance. She is advocating for freedom from the male gaze while also, professionally, generating enormous amounts of money from the attention of audiences that include the male gaze. She is asking people to respect her body while also being paid, in part, for how her body looks on screen. None of this makes her advocacy less valuable, but it does mean the story is more complex than either her harshest critics or her most ardent defenders acknowledge. And complex stories deserve complex analysis. Why this matters beyond Florence Pugh. Here is the final thing I want to say before we close out. The Florence Pugh fashion controversy is not about Florence Pugh. It's about the question that every